Have you ever wondered how to make sense of where the future of food is heading? Our next speaker today knows how you feel and has wrestled with that problem for years. He is a global food futurist speaker, foresight strategy consultant, and qualified food scientist with over 30 years' experience in the food industry. He's one of only a handful of food futurists globally, and he's here today because his background and experience give him a unique view on the answer to the problem of what future holds for the food, beverage, and agricultural industries. He's a lifelong science fiction fan, and as he likes to say, would you trust a futurist who didn't like science fiction? Everyone, please welcome food futurist Tony Hunter.
$11 billion. That's how many entities we're going to have on the planet in 2050. And I deliberately say entities because in addition to our 9.7 billion humans, we will have 1.3 billion, yes, billion pet cats and dogs on the planet, each eating as much protein as a human. How we feed these entities is the question of our time. Have you ever thought about that question? Have you ever wondered how we're going to feed all these entities? How on earth, literally on earth, are we going to be able to provide enough food? So, is this an existential threat? Or is this an opportunity to defeat the twin tyrannies of food production? Either way, we're at a once-in-a-generation crossroads, and the decisions and options we take in the next few years will echo down through the decades. So what are these options that we have? Well, the first one is, of course, business as usual. I mean, let's do what we've always done in the past. Let's just do more of the same. Well, let's see how that would work. Of the arable land on the planet, we currently use 50% for agriculture. Of that, more than 2/3 is used for animal agriculture in some way, shape, or form. And if we look at water, 92% of all freshwater withdrawals are used for agriculture. Well, maybe I should stop now. Actually, we're only using 50%. What if we just deforest the planet to grow more food? Maybe that might not end well, so maybe we do need to go on. The bottom line is there's not enough available arable land or fresh water on the planet to feed everybody on the globe today the way we eat in places like Europe, Australia, the UK, and the US. The way that we've all actually eaten at this conference today. So the bottom line is there is not enough arable land or fresh water on the planet. That's what we're faced with. So how far can we push planetary boundaries? I think given all of that information, the answer is not very far. We need to adopt a new paradigm. Our planet is not an infinite well of resources. It has boundaries. It's essentially a self-contained space station. So what's the second option that's often presented to us? Well, this one from the World Resources Institute. All we need to do is to get people who eat too much to stop eating so much, and we send it to the people who need it. I mean, what could be simpler? We've been telling people in advanced food system countries, don't eat so much or you will die of lifestyle-related diseases. How well has that worked? I don't think this one is going to be any more successful. And let's look at our third option, which is food waste. And I think that reducing food waste is a great thing to do. We need to maximise the amount of food that we get onto people's plates from the amount of food that we produce. The problem is, I don't think that's going to happen fast enough. If you have a look at where the majority of food waste happens, it's in the home. This report from November last year in the UK, 60% of all food waste was in the home. And if you go to the UK under COVID lockdowns, self-reported in-home food waste dropped dramatically, right? But guess what happened when lockdowns came off? They went right back up to where they were in 2018. So I think reducing the major source of food waste in the home is going to take generational change, and we simply don't have the time to wait. So how do we go about producing this 50 to 70% more food that we need? We can't just do more of the same. It's going to have to come from sources that use less resources and produce less pollution and less problems. So what this is in essence is all about is filling the gap between the amount of food that we can produce within planetary boundaries and the amount of food that we're going to need in 2050. That's what it's all about. And what is the answer? Is there an answer? Is there a way out of the maze? I say yes, there is. And that is to reimagine the global food system using new technologies. Why technologies? Well, you can't talk about food from farm to fork without talking about technology. Food used to be a sleepy technological backwater compared to things like the electronics industry, but no more. Technology is now everywhere in food. But it hasn't always been this way. To me, things really started changing in around 2017. So there I am, sitting at my desk in Brisbane, Australia. I have a nice hot cup of coffee. I'm sitting there in front of my computer, and I'm going through my newsletters. And I'm seeing technologies I've never seen before. Other technologies advancing far faster than I thought, and trends that, like, wow, where is this going with consumers? I sat back, and suddenly it hit me. In all my 25 years in the food industry, I'd never seen anything like the rate of change that I was seeing at that time. So, loving technology, I was fascinated, so I dug deeper. And the deeper I dug, the more fascinated I became. And as I dug deeper and the weeks and the months went by, I started to see that a lot of these new technologies fell into certain groups. And then I started to think about, well, okay, which of these technology groups are the most important? And that's where the hard work came in. So after 7 years of obsessive research on the future of food, I've come to the conclusion that we're approaching the intersection of 5 exponential technologies driven by 3 accelerator technologies that will drive the future of food for decades to come. And this provides us with a roadmap to the future of food, but not a static roadmap, more like a GPS, which changes with different changing conditions as time goes by. It's not static. So what are these 5 technologies? They are alternative proteins, cellular agriculture, genomics, the microbiome, synthetic biology, and driven by our 3 accelerator technologies, AI, quantum computing, and sensors, all leading to our exponential food future. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering, what on earth is a exponential food future? Well, it's based on 2 key concepts. The first concept, as I said, food is now technology. They're so linked together that you cannot separate one from the other. And one thing that we know about technologies is they advance exponentially. So who here has heard of Moore's law of computing? Yep, people, yep. Says basically that the power of a computer chip, the number of transistors, doubles every 18 months to 2 years. So if you look at that, after 2 years, it's 2, then 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. After 7 doublings, you have over 100 times, in less than 15 years, 100 times the computing power that you had before. Now, that's a great example of exponential growth. And that brings me nicely to a segue into a good example from the electronics industry. This is portable computing 1975 style. This is the IBM 5100. I used to have hair like that, but that's a whole other story. My friend, Mr. Robert L. Gordon here, has his hand on that first portable computer. Just one he's got his hand on. Who would like to guess how much that weighed? Give me a number. Yeah? 16 kilos anymore? It weighed 23 kilograms. Do not put that on your airline tray table on the way home. It is not going to end well. And that computer, fully spec'd up, maximum memory, maximum storage, the printer you saw there, a bit of offline storage, cost the princely sum of $19,750 US in 1975. That is a staggering $115,333 US in today's terms. Even more staggering, though, is this top-of-the-line computer came with 64K of storage. Not megabytes, not gigabytes, K of storage. Now, the latest Galaxy Z Fold comes with 10 million times the storage at 1/1000th of the cost, at 1/100th of the weight. That is the power of exponential technologies. Now, here you can see an ad for the IBM 5100. This is how wonderful this machine was. It could be used in all sorts of things, from real estate, in the animal agriculture industry. Here we have, this is the computer. That would basically do anything you would ever want it to do, all armed with 64K of storage and 64K of memory. So I'd say, that is the power of exponential technologies. So where do these concepts lead us? Well, first of all, food is now technologies advancing exponentially. You guessed it, food is now techsponential. So what do we do when armed with our techsponential technologies? And as you can see, that's the reason that my roadmap to the future of food is built upon technologies, because of the influence they have. Now, one of the first things we need to do is to distribute the means of production. We've seen how dangerous it is to grow things or produce resources on one side of the planet and ship them across to the other side of the planet. COVID showed us that. The Russia-Ukraine war has showed us that as well. So what we need to do is to redistribute the means of production. So, got to realize that the current global food system is not without its problems, though. And chief amongst those is that huge resource usage that we have. And they lead to the 415 or so dead zones all over the planet. And those dead zones are bodies of water where absolutely nothing can live. Vast underwater deserts. The most infamous of this is, of course, the Gulf of Mexico dead zone, but we have them in Chesapeake Bay. Even Lake Magadi in Kenya has a dead zone. So what do we do with countries who are developing their food systems? How do they avoid the problems that we've got with our current global food system? Yes, it has successfully fed billions of people, but we've got to realise it's not without its problems. Perhaps what they should do is do what Kenya did back in 2002 when they needed to dramatically improve their telecommunications. They had about 4 land and mobile lines combined per 100 people of their 38 million people population, and Ireland, as a comparison, had 77. So they dramatically needed to improve their telecommunications to drive their economy. So just let's pretend we're in the cabinet room of the Kenyan cabinet and the president is speaking. Now, next item on the agenda, telecommunications. We need to do something to get telecommunications running better in this country. Has any one of you got any ideas? Anything you think we should be doing? Yes, Mr. President, I've looked at what other countries have done, and what we should do is buy thousands of trenching machines, a couple of million kilometres of copper wire, we'll bury them all, put some stations in, and we'll get a homegrown handset industry. That's what I think we should do. Hand me the landline and let's get on with it. Now, I hope nobody thinks that is exactly what actually happened. And it wasn't what happened. What they obviously did was to call in the latest technology through large telecommunications companies. They gave the population cheap mobile phones, cell phones, sometimes second-hand, and they leapfrogged 100 years of telecommunications technology, look it up, literally 100 years, in a decade. So why can't countries who are developing a food system, or even countries with developed food systems, take this approach and leapfrog into the future with their food systems? And if we have a look at our Texponential Food Future model, we can understand the power of these technologies to create a whole new global food system. And I'm just going to talk about 3 of them today. That's alternative proteins, cellular agriculture, and synthetic biology, because those are the 3 primary industry and supply chain focus technologies. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the usual ones like plant-based burgers. We've all seen those, but how about food from air? This is a company called Solar Foods from Finland. They suck air into their proprietary equipment. They separate out the CO2, the nitrogen, and the water, and they split the water into hydrogen and oxygen using solar energy, hence Solar Foods. They then add some nutrients, some minerals, and some microbes, and they grow basically microbial protein that can be used to make anything from hamburger patties to ice cream. And they can do all of that with non-arable land. Their first factory is now up and running, and it can produce more protein per hectare, 10 to 100 times the protein per hectare that you can get from soy. And as I said, all on non-arable land. That's the key thing. Their product's been approved for sale in Singapore, and they've just got generally recognized as safe recognition in the US, and Ajinomoto in Japan has just released their first products based on soybean protein. They're mooncakes and ice cream sandwiches. Next one is, how about food from wood? I mean, we're all used to getting food from the usual sources, our plants and so on, but how about this? When we cut down a tree, all we want is that central trunk, right? We don't want the branches, we don't want the leaves, we don't want the sawdust that comes from milling or the bark. That's all we want. Usually the rest of that product is just disposed of. Now this company, Biome, they are using that and turning that into feedstock for growing microbes again, for growing protein. And it's highly sustainable because we're using byproducts. We're not using the crop itself just for food. And then we've talked about pets, and nothing would be complete without talking about our friends, the pets. This is unicorn pate from Wild Earth in the US. And normally cats are obligate carnivores, right? They must eat meat because it contains the amino acid taurine essential for their health. But they've made a plant-based product fortified with taurine so cats don't need to eat meat anymore. And there's quite a few articles coming out in the literature at the moment saying that plant-based foods for cats and dogs has definite health benefits. Our next technology is cellular agriculture, and the one you're probably all familiar with is cultivated meat, where you just take a few cells from an animal and you grow meat in huge stainless steel tanks. And that product's been available as chicken nuggets in Singapore since 2020, and in 2022 they had their product approved, their chicken breast product approved for sale in Singapore at Huber's Butchery. But you can't only use that to make products that we know, like chicken nuggets. You can actually grow and make animals things that actually don't even exist. Grow animal cells to make food that's just delicious, like the mythical qualia from Vow Foods based in Sydney in Australia. So that's what can be done with a lot of these technologies. We can come up with new foods that say don't even currently exist. And another technology that we've got in cellular agriculture is mammary gland agriculture. You can actually take stem cells from milk, you can grow miniature mammary glands, and you can grow milk and milk components for any mammal, including humans. So there's quite a few companies in this space. We've got a company called 108 Labs, BioMilk, and dairy giant Danone just recently invested $2 million in Wilk to make components for infant formulas. So is that a step towards replacing dairy as a base for infant formulas, which is one of the big profit centres currently for the dairy industry? But this is not only confined cellular agriculture to animal cells, you've got plant cells as well. Who likes chocolate? Yeah, that was quick. I hate to tell you, pollination rates are down. Disease is decimating cacao. Trouble getting labour. Deforestation. Our chocolate is in danger. Luckily, California Cultured has come to the party, and they are growing cacao plant cells in stainless steel fermenters and making chocolate components. They've just signed a 10-year deal with Meiji in Japan, one of the largest chocolate manufacturers in Japan, to supply them with cacao ingredients, as I said, for the next 10 years. And the last technology I want to talk about is synthetic biology. Now, often that's where you take the gene for something you want, you put it into an organism of some sort, you grow that organism, and you get the end product that you want. Probably the best known one is probably Perfect Day. They've put the gene for whey protein into a yeast, they grow the yeast, they extract the whey protein, and they turn that into all sorts of products, everything from ice creams to protein powders and all sorts of things. And this is one of my favourite ones. I call it growing animals in plants. Well, maybe not the whole animal, maybe just a little bit of the animal. So we've got a company here, Orf Genetics. They actually make the growth factors for cultivated meat in Bali, in Iceland, and elsewhere, and they actually supply the growth factors to Vow Foods to make their qualia product. But my favourite one is a company called Nobel Foods, and they've taken the gene for casein, put it into soybeans, they grow the soybeans, take out the casein, and use that to make cheese. So they will have products, test products on the market in 2025. And of course, the big advantage of plant molecular farming is that when you scale, you just plant more crops. You don't have to have stainless steel reactors built, factories built, all these sorts of things. As long as you've got the infrastructure downstream, then you're fine. And we talked about agriculture and the problems that we have with the resource usage and runoffs. So we have a company here called Pivot Bio. What they've done is they have a genetically engineered soil microbiome that can replace 44 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen for crops like wheat and corn. You can imagine with the problems getting nitrogen over the last couple of years, their product's been extremely popular, and it's actually sold out every single year. Now, you know, if you look at all those technologies, they are going to have a huge effect on the future of food. And now just turn to briefly to our accelerators. That's AI, quantum computing, and sensors. And of course, one of them requires a little bit more focus than the others because of the advance in the last few years. And that is, of course, generative AI. And
Wake up, Daddy.
that was meant to play, but it didn't. But anyway, so that is an AI from Iron Man from the Marvel Universe. That's Tony Stark's personal AI. Just a rather very intelligent system. And it's his personal AI. It greets him when he comes home. It helps him design his Iron Man suits. Now, until recently, something like that, easily usable AI, seemed like a far distant dream, something decades away. Then suddenly, as if from nowhere, AI sprang into the marketplace, like all exponential technologies. Released on November the 30th, 2022, within 5 days, it had 1 million users, faster uptake than any other technology that we've ever seen, including Spotify, any other technology at all. And that meant that the world would never be the same again. And just to be clear, we're talking about generative AI. We're not talking about traditional AI with its tables of data that we've been using for decades, where the AI's output is determined by explicit human programming. We're talking about generative AI, where the AI learns from the data it's trained on, finds patterns, and produces novel output. And that's why this technology will drive our other 5 technologies, because it can examine and find patterns in vast amounts of data that the human mind can't even comprehend. It'll find answers to questions that we didn't even know we had. Not only that, but it can help with sustainability. It can design products, use less resources, more sustainable, more cost-effective, and it can even come up with answers that will satisfy all stakeholders, from shareholders through to the community and the planet. And technologies are not going away. Technologies are only continuing to advance. I mean, every day we're bombarded with an avalanche of information. Newsletters, podcasts, webinars, conferences, all showing us a dizzying array of events and developments that will influence the future of our organisations. And in today's world, technologies and AI are right at the top of the list. And these technologies and understanding these technologies can't simply be delegated to the R&D people somewhere deep in the bowels of the building, or even to the IT departments, and then simply forgotten about. Why is that? Remember a company called Kodak? Kodak moment used to be a happy thing. Happy snaps, children on the beach, grandparents. Terrific. Now it means you're going out of business. So leaders from the chair, the board, C-suite, and all other executives need to understand technologies and what they mean for the future of their organizations, or they could end up experiencing their own Kodak moment. Now, we've covered a lot of ground in what we've talked about today. But the key thing to remember, All of these technologies are science fact. They are not science fiction. Some of them have products here today. Some of them will take years. Some of them can take a decade or more to come to the marketplace. But they are all here right now. And in case you're thinking, oh, Tony, that's all a bit, far-fetched again, isn't it? Remember, 10 million times the storage, 1/1000th of the cost, 1/100th of the weight in less than 50 years. Oh, by the way, they take photographs, surf the internet, watch cat videos, and so many other things. All in less than 50 years. So it really is true to say, today's reality was yesterday's science fiction. So when you're thinking about these technologies, remember that. And the key thing, though, across all of these three technologies is that they can help us grow food and avoid many of the problems that we see with the current global food system. And they can do that by using less resources, producing less pollution. They can also, if we localise production, they can then reduce the supply chain, which reduces food wastage. If we localise production, we also have more food sovereignty in countries and will help stabilise prices. And last, but by no means least, if we can decouple some of our production from those twin tyrannies, as I call them, of global food production, arable land and fresh water, then we can help feed the population sustainably. Because as we know, if you have lots of arable land and lots of fresh water, you have lots of food. If you don't have much arable land and you don't have much fresh water, you have less food. So I say decoupling or unlinking that arable land and fresh water from food production offers us the opportunity to actually feed the global population sustainably. So this brings us back to our crossroads options. Which option should we choose? Do we choose doing business as usual? Is it eat less and send it elsewhere? Could it be just waste less? We can obviously do more than one of these things, but I believe we need to use our Texponential roadmap to the future to reimagine the global food system using technologies. And as I said, it's capable of reacting in real time to all of these technologies that come about. And why should we use these technologies? By doing that, we can create a world of food abundance even with 11 billion entities on the planet. And let's never forget, the world's greatest problems are also the world's greatest opportunities. As a food industry, we need to seize this opportunity to reimagine the global food system to sustainably, healthily, and fairly feed their global population, and in the process, invent the future of our space station planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I hope you do come back to talk to us for a couple of minutes. I absolutely loved your visuals, loved your shoes, and the entire presentation. So thank you so much for that. When you mentioned all of the 5 technologies, and when you said that AI will drive the 5 technologies, there are certain things that stop these technologies to be driven. For example, we had a panel debate on protein diversification right before your presentation, and we have said that in the EU, maybe we are working on the protein balance sheet, but the protein strategy is wanted from the EU. No real strategy is coming out, and you know the story, and so on and so forth. So what do we do with these obstructions?
I mean, I think the thing is, what I see from the outside in the EU is that there are many good things the way the EU is approaching its food supply, And there are so many restrictions on it that I think the EU over the next 5 years will find itself ever increasingly behind in new food technologies. And I think that science needs to take the place of some of the ideologies and politics, which is easy to say and very, very hard to do. But if the EU is to continue to supply itself with food and not simply push off food production out of their own land mass onto someone else's, then things need to change.
Let's see if there is a question or two in the audience or a comment maybe. I do encourage that because in the morning we tried that and that worked out really well. After one question was asked, then everybody else followed and we had a really nice interactive session. When you mention food from air, food from wood, unicorn pate, I was wondering, food from wood, for example, does it really make sense? Because we would then need to cut a lot more trees.
The thing is, we're cutting the trees down for lumber. So we're making timber to make houses and make furniture, make everything else. So they're using the waste from that
so
to make the food. So therefore, that's why it's so sustainable, because if we're just growing things for food, then we have wastage from that, then that's a problem. But when we're using up waste, that helps.
How many of these things have you yourself tried? Like food from wood, food from air, the microbial protein that could be done with no arable land. What was it again? Growing animals in plants.
Our main problem is a lot of these products are available in certain parts of the world, in places like Singapore and in places like Finland and so on. So unfortunately, I haven't tasted many of them. Cultivated meat, obviously many plant-based proteins, but I'm hoping to be in Finland at the end of November to try some of the products there.
Once they are in the market, will that be much more expensive than regular food, you would say?
I would think that, like most technologies, they start off more expensive. There is probably not much doubt about that, because a lot of it requires volume. And once you get the volume and you drive prices down, but also we're going to look at, there's going to be a huge global demand for food out of particularly countries like India, down through Southeast Asia and up into China. And once that happens, we could find food prices being driven up, which will make some of these products more economically viable.
If the time comes when we don't use the arable land for food ever, when would you project that to happen?
I tell you, futurists, I hate to tell you, futurists do not predict the future. All we can do is say, here's where things are going, and there is an alternative future. Now, we look at some of the alternative proteins. There is a future where it's 90% alternative proteins and 10% meat. There's a future where it's 90% meat and 10% alternative proteins. No one knows exactly where that is going to lie because it's so complicated and there's so many critical things. Like you mentioned, price. If plant-based products are twice the price of meat products, we know which way that's going to go. If meat's twice the price of the alternative products, we know where that's going to go. So there are a lot of variables out there, but the key thing is if you keep up with these technologies and see which way they're going as things develop, then you can get very close to be able to say, well, look, this is where the future looks like it's heading. My organisation needs to be prepared for that future. And flexibility, agility, those are going to be key words in the next 5 or 10 years because, boy, every time I thought I'd seen it all, something else came up in one of my newsletters. So I've long ago given up thinking I've seen it all.
But would that be your ultimate wish as a food futurist to have, arable land-free food in the future? Is that a utopia? I
think that what we've got to look at is, in the near future, there's no way we're going to see crops and animal agriculture disappear. If we stop raising animals for food tomorrow, 60 days no chickens, 6 months no pigs, 2 years no beef, no cattle. Where are we going to get the protein from? How are we going to process it? The infrastructure doesn't exist. So I think looking at that, that's going to continue for decades to come. As the population stabilises, then the cake is not getting bigger, then you start seeing more competition. But at the moment, the pie is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger with more people, more pets on the planet, And so I think that's going to take a long, long time. I think what we need to do, the key thing for me is however we make food, it must be within planetary boundaries. That's the bottom line. Now, how we get there, there's lots of different ways we could get there. But if we don't keep it within planetary boundaries, we all know what the consequences are going to be. As I said, we could deforest the whole planet and just do more of the same, but probably not going to end well.
There is a question in the audience, and because I promised that we would answer some, we'll get at least one because time is running out. If you could take the microphone and introduce yourself. There's one more.
Yeah, thank you. Joan, how good year. I was curious if you could speak a little bit more about, like you spoke a lot about manufacturing innovations and technologies. If you've done kind of any research on the farming side and technologies that are shaping how farmers produce food, and how does that impact some of the future food trends?
Yeah, so I did sort of briefly touch on that, you're right, but not very much with the pivot bio side of things. But I mean, if you have a look at what's going on in terms of the genetic modification of crops and so on, I think with how fast the climate change is happening, that traditional plant breeding is not going to keep up. I know, particularly in the EU, there's strong anti-GMO sentiment. I don't bring ideology, I look at the science, and the science says I don't understand why. So from that point of view, I think that's what we're going to need. We're going to need that in the crop growing side, optimise what we get. There's also a project called the RIPE project, which is about increasing photosynthesis in plants, getting rid of some of the bottlenecks. That again is some genetic modification which could give us some really big increases in crop yields. There's a lot going on in that area. And I suppose I didn't touch on things like robotics and farm ag because you know, there's a lot of that out there at the moment. Thanks.
We'll take one final question from the audience.
Thank you, Adelina Dabo is my name. Very interesting presentation. And I was looking into your views on the consumer perspective, because the adoption of all these new technologies and new type of food comes in a context where we've learned, trying to learn now to eat natural food, and that's more perceived like synthetic foods. GMOs do not have a good branding, let's say, either.
You've just got me started on half an hour already.
So food is culture also, and yeah, we connect to nature through food, but this is a different approach.
Thank you.
A couple of things there. First of all, the word natural. Ooh, now isn't that a charged word? Who thinks cheese is natural? No, milk's natural. Show me cheese in nature without mankind making it. Yogurt's about the only natural milk-based product there is, because if you leave enough milk around, some of it will turn into yogurt and you won't get killed when you eat it, right? People think, who thinks sausages are natural? Take the intestine of a pig, clean it out, cut up a cow and stuff it into an intestine. Natural? Please, this, you know, like, I find that whole word natural for consumers to me means I've seen it ever since I was born and I'm quite used to it and I'm quite happy with it. That's natural. Natural is a very charged word. And you're right, consumers, it doesn't matter how good your technology product is. If consumers will not buy it, forget it, right? Now, the thing is, what I look at is I look at who is the consumer we should be thinking about. And I say, everybody talks about Gen Z or Gen Z if you're American friends. I say, forget them. You need to be looking at Gen Alpha, those born 2010, end of 2024. By the end of this year, there will be 2 billion Gen Alphas on the planet. Now, as a benchmark, when the boomers finished in 1964, there were 3.5 billion people on the whole planet. That generation is going to be the most influential generation, the largest generation we've ever seen and probably ever will see. And I talk to millennial parents and I say, what do you do if your child wants to do something? They say, yeah, generally the family ends up doing it, don't they? So Gen Alpha is the one that's going to drive the future of food. And if you look at some surveys that have been done, they did a survey asking the generations how comfortable they were with technology being used to make their food. Now, you can't do too much on Gen Alpha. They're too young. Market research on children. if we do a bit of extrapolation, right? 77% of Gen Z said they were comfortable with technology being used to make their food. 68% of millennials, and Gen Y and boomers tied at 58%. So as the generations go on, they're more and more comfortable with technology being used to make their food. Now, if it stays the same or even extrapolates further, Gen Alphas may be very comfortable with technology being used to make their food because they are not just digital natives, they are technology natives. They've grown up with Spot, the Boston Dynamics dancing robot, SpaceX just shooting private rockets into space, mRNA vaccines, streaming video, streaming. They see technology in everything they do. And my opinion is that I find it unlikely that they're going to say, I want technology and personalization in everything I do, but not my food. Just leave that alone, please. I find that unlikely. Not impossible. It's an alternative future, but I find it unlikely that that's what's going to happen. And we're faced with it. This is how much food we can grow within planetary boundaries. Natural food, or whatever we want to call it. That's how much food we need. Someone's going to have to eat the technology stuff. They're going to go hungry. That's my view.
So all hopes are on Generation Alpha.
Gen Alpha, they're the ones. Anyone interested? I have a whole talk on Generation Alpha and AI. So
we hope we can have you next year. Yes. At this point, we would have to stop and thank you very, very much for your speech and for your answers of our audience's questions as well. Tony Hunter.
Thank you.